In this video, we're going to cover brush setup, tools and tips that I find useful while hard surface sculpting in Blender. Then we'll bring them all together to create a shield, pauldron and hand axe. Let's get to it. ZBrush has a great tool called HPolish, which allows you to steadily polish a flat surface. We can emulate this behaviour in Blender. Duplicate the scrape brush, rename it to HPolish, check the plane trim and set it to 0.2. I'm just using a sphere here to try it out. As you can see, it flattens the surface nicely but also maintains the edge slightly. Next, we need a planar brush. Duplicate the scrape tool again and set the plane offset to 0.25. Uncheck accumulate and use original, normal and plane. With this brush, once you start the stroke, it will continue to use the same normal direction, giving you a very flat surface indeed. The line project tool is a great way to get some flat edges quickly and trim away any unneeded geometry. You can use this by clicking and dragging the line that you wish to create. Anything in the shaded area will get trimmed away. If you're like me and you constantly draw the line in the wrong direction, you can hit the F key and flip the direction which it will trim. Also, if you hold the spacebar while drawing the stroke, you can move the stroke around. Holding Control while dragging enables you to snap to various degree increments. It's worth noting that this tool doesn't really trim the geometry away at all. Rather, it compresses all the geometry on the shaded side towards the line. So as you see here, it can create issues when the side being trimmed is wider than the side that won't be. Check the limit to segment option to only trim away the line that you draw. I find this gives you more control. The Lasso Trim tool allows you to cut away a much more fluid shape. It can take a little time, especially for my computer, to work out how it needs to trim, and you don't get the best edge once it's complete. However, it's great for defining that initial shape. Using the Bool tool add-on, we can use different shapes to cut away from our original one. Using a square as an example here, if we select this first and then our base object and hit the difference button, then we can use that square to trim away from our original shape. If you use the same method, except this time hit one of the brush boolean options, you can see that the object you're using to trim away has turned into a wireframe. You can then drag this around and preview how the trim will look before you actually apply it. A good tip here is to click your original object and change the modifier to use the fast solve method, as I find it's much quicker in previewing your boolean. Okay, so let's start putting some of these tools into practice. First of all, let's make a shield. Starting with a square, I stretch it out over the Z x-axis, paint a mask on and mask slice and fill holes. So I'm using cylinders to trim away the main shape, trying to create some sort of visual interest there. Using the grab brush to bend into a more shield-like shape. Anything looks cooler with a skull in the middle. It's worth pointing out that I don't really have a plan for these objects that I'm making. I've got a couple of ideas on Pinterest that I'm looking at, but I'm trying to just make just something that looks interesting. Using that HPolish brush to flatten out the cheekbones. Once I've trimmed away using a shape, I'm having to mirror the the change. I'm using the line project to flatten out those sides, and then I can use the grab brush to bend them again so they have a cleaner edge. Painting out a mask for the edge trim of the shield, and then if I duplicate the object and inflate the edge trim, then that'll make it poke out from the original object, and then I can paint over with clay strips to increase the volume of it. And then we can go around with that HPolish brush and really tidy up those edges. I only spent about 40 minutes on each object, so the finish that I get isn't as nice as I would like, but if you spend a little more time, you can get a really clean finish. Just trying out a design in the middle here, but I don't think I use this in the end. It's something worth doing, quickly sketching out different ideas for shapes and things when you're making something like this, because you never know what you might come up with and what might look good. Using Control-Shift-Drag there to mask out a certain area, and then you can use the grab brush to pull up or down the remaining geometry, and you can get some nice sharp edges. Just refining the skull further now. Using pinch to sharpen up those tusks. You find that it gets too sharp when you're pinching. You can use the inflate brush to increase the volume there a bit more, and smooth sometimes helps create a point like this. Oh yes, something I forgot to mention is you'll notice I'm using a lot of custom pie menus. If you look in the description, you can find out more about these. as those original cylinders I used to cut away at the shield, the edges have got a little bit messy since we've been working with 2 objects now. So I'm just positioning some spheres to tidy up those shapes, making sure to duplicate them in place by hitting Shift D and then the escape key so they stay in place, and then I'm able to use the difference boolean on both of the object. So I think this is the design I go with in the middle now. Quite handy to use the snake hook so you can twist the mesh, and then you can create some nice flowing shapes with that. From a cylinder, just creating a handle. If I use the, I think it's the Z and Y axis to use the mirror, masking out the top and bottom and rotating the mesh to make a handle shape. So I think we're pretty much there now. I'm just tidying up using the HPolish brush. Masking out the back of the skull there, and then just scaling the unmasked part just to create a tidier edge where the skull meets the shield. These kind of things are quite important to think about if you're thinking of 3D printing an object like this. So I'm just trying to tidy up the back at the moment. And I'm using a duplicate of the shield to try and difference boolean away from the existing one, just to clean that up at the back. Masking out a small part of the design in the middle, and I'm able to sort of pull out the geometry using the snake hook and twist it just to create a little bit more visual interest. Okay, so that's our shield complete. Moving on to creating a pauldron now, using the standard brush mainly at first, just to mark out where the main shapes will be. Just marking out the edge trim now. We can separate this into separate objects as we get further into the sculpt. using clay strips to define that edge trim a little better, and using pinch at the top to make it taper in. So now I've duplicated the object and using clay strips to push back the geometry that isn't the trim. Remeshing to a much higher density and then going in with the HPolish brush just to tidy up that trim. Using the grab brush every now and then just to make sure the shapes are flowing correctly. Using the mesh filter, you're able to inflate the entire mesh if that's required. Trying to focus on the big picture at first, and then as we get a little more detail, focusing a bit closer on different areas of the shapes. So using that line project to just trim away the top part of the pauldron, just to give a little contrast in the shape language. Just tidying up the way that the shapes meet each other. Using that planar brush to really define those faces on the back of the pauldron. You can see you get a really clean result here. Okay, and there we go. The pauldron's complete. I did add on some horns at the end, just quickly, which I didn't record unfortunately. So moving on to the axe now. Starting with the sphere and just elongating it, then using grab and snake hook to pull out the axe head, and we're just sort of sketching out the main shape of the object at first. So it's okay for it to be quite rough at this point. Because as we did with the previous objects, we can separate them out and tidy up each shape as we go. Using line project to get those clean edges. Sketching out the whole shape in this way allows you to see the proportions a little better before you start separating into different objects, and then might become a little bit more difficult to make global changes like this. Using that HPolish brush to define the edge of the axe head. Masking out most of the axe, the line project will only affect the unmasked portion, so you can work out some quite creative ways to use this. That planar brush is handy for flattening out the axe head there. Drawing out the base of the axe with a mask, then duplicating the object and mask slice and fill holes. Once we've separated the axe head and the back of the axe blade, we're able to use the mirror tools so we get some nice symmetrical shapes. Once we've upped the resolution, we can go in with the HPolish and really clean up those edges, and the Planar Brush to really flatten them out nicely. Trying to create a bit of visual interest with the handle, having it have some more angles there, and the HPolish brush on the base to give that a bit more structure. Pushing in a small part of the base so that we can add a little detail with just a sphere. I suppose it depends at what scale you might want to print this as to how detailed you go. But I guess with these shapes we're just focusing on the main silhouette they'll produce, as I tend to focus a lot on creating fantasy style miniatures. When you're polishing the edge of an axe like this, for example, sometimes you can go a little bit too far and the geometry gets a bit squished at the very edge, and you can use the inflate and the smooth tool to correct this. Selecting all the objects and then selecting the handle last, we can pair them all together so that we can just control the axe with just the handle. Just join the axe blades and the center cylinder so that we can smooth out the transition and make it look as though it's one piece. And there we go. We've completed the shield, the pauldron and the axe, and I hope from this video that you've picked up some new tips for hard surface sculpting in Blender and it's been of some help to you. check out this necromancer I recently finished. He uses all of the tools mentioned in this video to create his hard surface shapes. He comes pre-supported and ready to print and stands at about 55mm tall. Be sure to check him out. You can download tools and resources for sculpting in Blender on my Gumroad. Visit mwsculpts.gumroad.com to find out more. Also, don't forget, you can support me on Patreon if you like the content I'm creating. Thanks to everybody who supported me so far. Check out their names here. I'll see you in the next video.